Huzzah! Ali the Trans Gamer Girl here, and welcome to this pilot for what I hope to become the first of a new series on my channel. Now, I call this show Ali Rambles, where I basically ramble on pretty much unscripted on a particular topic. Now, today's topic we're going to be dealing with the subject of privilege. Now, the reason I'm doing this is, yet again, as I always do, I've seen a lot of people discussing what is privilege, how can I have privilege when I go through all this, blah blah blah. So, we're actually going to go through it, and hopefully we're going to clear up some misconceptions. So, before we can deal with what privilege is, I think it's a good idea for us to discuss what privilege isn't. Now, privilege does not mean that you haven't had to struggle in your life. Privilege does not mean that everything is nice and sunny. Privilege just means that you have some advantage that someone else doesn't. Every single person has some sort of privilege. It's just a fact. Men have privilege, women have privilege, white people have privilege, rich people have privilege. There's privilege for pretty much any social, what's the word? For any social group, essentially. So, privilege is an advantage. It doesn't have to be a major advantage, and it's not necessarily something that you notice. So it can be something as simple as, for example, myself. I'm a poor trans girl. Now that puts me at a pretty much disadvantage in a lot of areas. But as you can tell, I am white. That means that living in a predominantly white country, although it is pretty multicultural here, that means that I don't have to suffer prejudgments based on my skin colour. I can pretty much go most places and people, other than me being trans, won't think anything bad of me. That's not necessarily something that happens to people of colour. But some people of colour have privilege that white people don't have. There are places that they would be able to go that are pretty much dominated by people of colour, and they wouldn't draw attention. That's the privilege of their particular skin colour. Men have privilege. Men have the privilege of being taken seriously on pretty much anything they want to talk about, for the most part. Men have the privilege of not, for the most part, having to worry about being sexually assaulted or raped. But then there's female privilege, where pretty much most of society looks more favourably on women. Women may of course not see it that way, but there are preconceived notions that most people have that women are less strong, less capable, more emotional. So, and especially men will treat women, for the most part, better than they would another man. Most men, that's not to say all men, but most men in an argument with a woman in the street wouldn't think to hit her, whereas with a man they might. Obviously there's rich privilege, which is pretty much the sort of privilege that most people think about when they hear the words privilege. It means having a higher station, So, if you're rich, you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. You don't have to worry about whether the lights will stay on. But that isn't the only type of privilege there is. Privilege comes in all shapes and sizes. There's the young privilege. It's the privilege of no one looking at you and thinking that you're old and frail or past it. It's the privilege of having a young, youthful body. Maybe not for everyone that's young, but for the most part, young, physically fit body, able to run around and move around without too much difficulty. And then, of course, there's older privilege, where, again, for the most part, people treat older people usually with a bit more respect. Not always, but for the most part, in general. And that's what privileges are. They're generalisations, and they're the sort of things that we just don't notice. So, when someone says that you need to check your privilege, they're basically just saying that whatever you're talking about, because that's usually when it comes up, as you pretty much all know, you're discussing a topic that for you won't seem like a problem, but for someone that doesn't have your straight privilege, white privilege, rich privilege, whatever privilege it may be, would have experienced whatever the problem is. So your experiences just aren't the same. You can't relate to the problem in that same way. And as I say, when people say that, they're not saying you've had an easy life. That's just plain false. And it's a problem not just with the right-wingers, the centrists, the anti-SJWs. Even people on the left sometimes struggle with the idea of privilege. Because even the most progressives, sometimes they don't always recognise their privilege for what it is. Even though everyone has some sort of privilege. It's just a fact. And it's not demeaning to say that you've got privilege, and it's just what it is. You see, privilege isn't something that's just, as I say, it doesn't make it so you've never had to struggle. It's just that someone without your privilege, whether it be the colour of your skin, the class you were born in, you're able-bodied or whatever, that someone that doesn't have that would likely have had a harder time than you in exactly the same circumstances. And that is all privilege is. So maybe next time when someone tells you to check your privilege, just take it for that. They're not saying what you're saying is not worth anything. It's just you can't see the things that you've not had to experience because of whatever factor of your life has prevented that, withheld that from you. That's all it is. Well, I guess this is going to be a fairly short one. But hopefully this has been enlightening and it's helped you at least understand things just that little bit better. Well, that's what I hope anyway. And hopefully you've enjoyed this particular video. If you have, please do the usuals, you know, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. And hopefully I'll see you again next week. And in the meantime, keep being awesome. Bye bye.